A lot of people sing praises about life. Youth, yes. Death, yes. But I've never heard anyone sing about old age. The most pitiful stages of life are childhood and old age, both powerless and at the mercy of others. Respect the elderly and care for the young is just polite talk. If you're willing to swallow your pride and endure silently, only then will others grant you a shred of dignity, letting you save face instead of outright slapping you across both cheeks. And while people say, "Don't bully the poor young man," no one ever says, "Don't bully the poor old man." At my age, everything in this world feels like an enemy. My vision is blurred, my hearing muddled, my touch clumsy, my comprehension slow, my learning impossible, and my pace too lagging. Even my own body works against me. Take right now, for instance, Chun Jangwo has been in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Impatient, I urged him, "Are you done yet?" His sluggish reply came, "Almost there." I heard a small, pitiful trickle in the toilet bowl. I knew exactly what the problem was, but there was nothing I could do. An aging, swollen, and malfunctioning prostate is harder to tackle than Li Yunlong's fortified Ping'an County. Modern medicine, ancient remedies, nothing works. And today, he must empty himself completely. The digital clock loudly reminded me it was 5:30 a.m. Beijing time. Out of habit, I glanced at my wristwatch, but the hands seemed to multiply into 5. Realizing my vision had worsened again, I let out a sigh. I never thought I'd live to see 70. Much less that I'd be dragged back into my old line of work at this age. I said, "If you don't finish in 5 minutes, I'll sign the informed consent form for removing your testicles when you're sent to the hospital for your next stroke." Old Chen finally emerged, pulling up his pants as he asked, "If anything should go, it's the prostate. What's this got to do with my testicles?" I replied, "Because you're a useless old man." He fell silent. There are only 2 reasons a man would endure such an insult without lashing out. 1, he's impotent in bed. 2, he's ineffective outside of it. At 74, Chen Zhengwo unapologetically belonged to the first category. Unfortunately, this time he also fell into the second. Simply put, this man, who once thrived for 15 tumultuous years and retired unscathed, failed, twice, to deal with a frail internet-addicted weakling. I said, "You need to accept your age. The tricks you relied on when you were young won't work anymore." As the saying goes, 3 years old shows the future. And when he was young, thinking was never his strong suit. Back then, he measured meals in buckets, was all muscle, and embodied the phrase, "white blade in, red blade out." But time is unforgiving. After stomach surgery, he now survives on liquid meals. His muscles have withered into mere skin and bone, and it takes him 20 minutes just to kill a chicken. So, the job falls to me, the old woman. I rubbed my eyes, still plagued with dryness after cataract surgery. My daughter told me to bear with it. The implication was clear. I wouldn't live much longer. Fighting a medical malpractice suit wasn't worth it. It was the truth, though harsh. My daughter and I both knew it, and keeping quiet about it allowed us to maintain harmony. Expose it, and 40 years of mother-daughter ties would shatter. Some truths, left unsaid, preserve everyone's dignity. So, as I applied artificial tears, I told Chen Zhengwo, "Bring the cat." He obeyed. The cat was expensive and strikingly beautiful. It stretched lazily on my lap, and for a fleeting moment, I hesitated. But then, I grasped one of its hind legs and bent it sharply. The cat's shriek pierced through the floorboards. 23 days ago, my granddaughter, Yan Sheng, told us. The older brother upstairs touched me in the elevator. I saw the few strands of Chen Zhengwo's limp, white hair stand on end. Anger burned on his balding head, though he dared not scare the child. He spoke gently. "What do you mean he touched you?" Yan Sheng gestured and explained. "He put his hand under my skirt and touched where I pee, then told me not to tell any adults. After that, he made me smell his hand and said it smelled good." Chen Zhengwo kept his face calm and turned to me, saying warmly, "Dear, you watch Yan Sheng for now." He went into the room. A moment later, he came back out, reeking of heart medication. Smiling, he called our daughter to take the child home. Once they left, his true emotions exploded. He crushed a glass in his bare hand, shards embedding under his fingernails as blood flowed freely. His teeth clenched so tightly I thought they might break. I knew what he intended to do. If you asked him, he'd declare with righteous fervor, "I'm going to kill that bastard." So, I softly reminded him, "Your hip replacement was just last year, and your knees aren't what they used to be either." The body is the foundation of revolution, and crime too. Chun Jang-wo had no choice but to acknowledge his age. Like that cowardly brat in Farewell, my concubine smashing bricks over his head. Not something you can do your whole life. Within 2 weeks, Chun Jang-wo tried tailing that boy twice. Both times, he nearly lost the dentures that had cost us 20,000 yuan. He never managed to draw blood from the bastard. Instead, his bloodshot eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Anyone who didn't know better might have thought it was some modern-day tortoise and hare race. Eventually, he admitted defeat. With a long sigh, he turned to me and said, "Fine, your way. Tell me what to do." Resting my chin on my hand, I pondered aloud. I might not succeed either. Chun Jang-wo replied, "We'll try. If it doesn't work, there are other ways." I knew what he meant, throwing himself and the boy off the 5th floor, life for a life. I sighed, straightened my posture, and told him, "I'll need a few things." One was a beautiful pet cat. At this moment, the cat's leg was broken. Its pained cries echoed as I opened the window, letting it scramble and tumble from the 4th floor to the ground below. 5:40 a.m. We watched the startled, suffering white cat dart into the bushes. Then we dressed properly, took the elevator downstairs, and put on entirely different faces. I dabbed my eyes with a handkerchief, tears streaming as I walked and called out, "Mimi." Chun Jang-wo stayed silent, but his expression was deeply somber as he prodded the bushes with his cane. As expected, we soon ran into him. Zhang. During the days when Chun Jang-wo plotted his murder, I thoroughly investigated the bastard. 27 years old, unemployed, spends his nights in internet cafes. He always made it back home before his father woke up for work. 3 minutes later, I deliberately bumped into him at the corner. Grabbing his arm excitedly, I asked, "Xiao Zhang, you have sharp eyes. Did you see my cat?" His eyes darted quickly before he smiled and steadied me. "Granny, what cat?" I said, "A white one, with some gray fur on its head and tail. They call it a ragdoll cat, quite expensive. This morning, it somehow jumped out the window." As I spoke, I wept. If I can't find it, I might as well die. That cat is like my own child. He consoled me. "Don't worry, Granny. I'll help you look right away." He walked a few steps before turning back to ask, "Granny, do you know which direction it went?" Calmly, I pointed to the bushes. The trail left by the ragdoll cat was convincing enough. After about 10 minutes of us feigning ignorance, he found an excuse and slipped away. I quietly wiped away my tears. This boy had a history of animal abuse. The thrill he derived didn't come from killing itself, but from domination. What could be more satisfying to him than destroying someone's cherished possession? If he'd known that the cat and I were more strangers than companions, he probably wouldn't have been so eager. I told Chun Jang-wo, "Let's go home." For the sake of my dim old eyes, I'd learned to use screen mirroring. Now, the cat's collar tracker showed it steadily approaching my apartment, eventually stopping in my bedroom. It couldn't distinguish vertical distances. Zhang had brought the cat home. His detour delayed his usual schedule. He should have been back in his room before his mother got up. But now, his mother was awake and starting to prepare breakfast. Suddenly, the collar tracker shifted a few meters. It had been removed. I couldn't help but sigh, torn by a pang of guilt. 6:25 a.m. In 5 minutes, Zhang Erqi's younger sister, Zhang Gaoer, would get up for breakfast before heading to school. I took 2 small apples from the fridge, ones marketed as New Zealand imports, and told Chun Jang-wo, "Stay home and wait for me." I went upstairs to the 5th floor and knocked on the door. It was answered by Zhang Erqi and Zhang Gaoer's mother, Miss Sun, who held a spatula dripping with oil. Feigning surprise, I said, "Oh dear, I forgot you've got kids going to school and work at this hour. My daughter brought me some fancy New Zealand rocket apples. The two of us can't chew them anymore, so I thought I'd give one to each of your kids." I emphasized the last part for anyone awake to hear. She chuckled and lowered her voice, saying, "That's too kind of you. Wouldn't it be better to save them for your granddaughter?" I saw a metaphorical set of calipers materialize in her eyes, measuring the apples down to the millimeter. Despite her hesitation, she had no choice but to humor me. I shoved the apples into her hands, saying, "Take them, we're all neighbors here." Her toes had already turned toward her son's room, and now she finally moved. I lingered at the door, watching her knock on his door, without success. Then she glanced at her daughter's room, looking a bit tense. She reached under the coffee table for a spare key and unlocked the door. As soon as she stepped inside, there was a sudden commotion, and the door slammed shut again. At that moment, Zhang Gaoer also emerged from her room. Her hair was neatly combed, her school uniform immaculate, and her backpack was slung over her shoulder. She cast a cold glance at her brother's door, muttered, "I'm not eating," and brushed past me. I fell in step with her. In the elevator, she asked with a slight smile, "Grandma, what did you bring us this time?" Feigning ignorance, I replied, "Just 2 apples, imports. One for you, one for your brother." She smiled back and said, "Thanks, Grandma." We both lowered our heads, saying nothing more. But when I stole a glance, I saw her reflection in the elevator's walls, eyes burning with hatred, veins bulging at her temples. I returned to the 4th floor. Chun Jengwo, having waited so long he had to rush to the bathroom, now emerged tugging at his waistband. He asked, "How did it go?" Leaning against the couch, I massaged my temples and said, "So far, so good. That bastard is definitely killing the cat in his room, and Xiao's son must have seen it." Chun Jengwo let out a long breath, suddenly more at ease, even forgetting his urgency to relieve himself. People born in the 70s so stubborn. "Ugh," I scoffed. "Don't underestimate her. For all her failures in raising that bastard, she still thinks her son is a gem." Xiao's son was a typical patriarchal parent, born in 1972, raised in the city, yet constantly harping about her responsibilities to her ancestors as if to justify her preference for her son. My husband and I had only one daughter in our lifetime. Even with one foot in the grave, we never dwelled on what would happen after we were gone. I couldn't fathom why Xiao's son had so many premature worries. The apples were ordinary, but imported apples? I could predict how she'd divide them. 1 whole apple for her son, half an apple for her husband, and the last half shared between herself and her daughter. I timed my visit precisely. Xiao's son would have snuck her son's portion to him before her daughter woke up. But years of observing her mother's antics had made the girl keen-eyed and sharp-eared. She'd hear it, see it, and seethe with resentment. 2 birds with 1 stone. I wondered how she'd explain the cat blood all over her son's room. Each step in this plan had to be seamless. Even for me, it was mentally exhausting. I glanced at Chen Jengwo, who, perceptive as ever, fetched a cigarette from the coffee table, placed it between my lips, and lit it, saying with mock servility, "Your humble servant presents the Empress with a smoke." I spat at him, but kept my eyes fixed on the oversized electronic clock above the gaudy landscape painting on the wall. Tacky but convenient. I tapped the armrest of the sofa lightly. 5, 4, 3. Old age dulled precision. From upstairs came the sound of dishes and bowls crashing, sharp and crisp. Hooked. I took a deep breath, letting my nerves relax. 6:43 a.m. Old Zhang, the father of the 2 Zhang siblings, husband to Xiao's son, was a man with a notoriously explosive temper. Back in the day, he, Chen Jengwo, and I worked in the same unit. Chun Jengwo, and I got housing, he didn't. Chun Jengwo, and I got promoted, he didn't. We retired honorably. He was bought out. No mystery there. He was insufferable. Known for his rigid dogmatism and stinking personality, he considered himself superior to his rural colleagues, female co-workers, and anyone with less education. Essentially, he was a local version of a self-righteous K-party figure who fancied himself from a literary family, though his manners were appalling, with his household behavior well into the negatives. Having him as a neighbor was a lifelong misfortune. When we were younger, he would beat his wife so loudly that the whole building could hear it. Every few days, if something displeased him, he'd smash the house to pieces. This morning, if breakfast wasn't laid out perfectly on the table, he'd certainly accuse his wife of failing her duty as a housemaid and flip the entire table. The ceiling dust had shaken loose, falling into Chen Jiangwo's eyes. For once, Xiao Sun hadn't made a sound. Probably because she was still in Zhang Erqi's room. I heard angry footsteps stomping around upstairs. Just one person. I asked Chen Jiangwo, "Do you think Xiao Sun will tell old Zhang about her son torturing the cat?" Chen Jiangwo raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Only if she wants him beaten to death." Old Zhang was pure violence. He treated his wife and son as his property, and the moment something upset him, he'd pull out his belt and lash away. Back when Zhang Erqi was a teenager, his refusal to go to school had landed him in the hospital after a beating. Yet, old Zhang often took pride in not laying a finger on his daughter, boasting, "I've never touched her in my life." He couldn't fathom why the daughter he never hit didn't take his side. Suddenly, frantic footsteps rushed upstairs again, and shouting erupted. Through the window drifted one-sided verbal abuse. Old Zhang lacked originality. His tirades against his wife always centered on calling her a parasite, berating her for staying at home, and living off him for over a decade. I sighed. From what I knew, old Zhang hadn't washed a single pair of underwear or socks in their 30 years of marriage. He had no idea which class his kids were in and had never attended a parent-teacher conference. His wife managed every penny, feeding and clothing the family while he enjoyed life, all the while assuming she was siphoning money for herself. At least Chen Jiangwo, and I wouldn't dare lift a finger against the maid we paid 5,000 yuan a month to hire. Feeling a bit hungry, I shuffled to the kitchen in my slippers to reheat some snacks, calling out. Men like that, they have kids and still don't understand the meaning of karma. Violent fathers are curable. By their sons' 20s or even their teens, they calm down, learn to reason, and as they age further, they even master the art of tears, self-pity, publicizing their private misfortunes and endless complaints, the kind of whiny behavior they once scorned. Don't ride the wind too far when you're proud. Upstairs, I heard a door slam. I knew Zhang Erqi must have rushed out to protect Xiao Sun. For all his faults, he had one redeeming quality. He loved his mom. Old Zhang's voice dropped immediately, followed by a small commotion. Then came the sound of the front door slamming shut. Old Zhang had gone to work. Chen Jiangwo and I sat down to finish off last night's dumplings, yesterday afternoon's stir-fried vegetables, and yesterday morning's porridge. We ate until we were glowing with satisfaction. Eventually, Xiao Sun had to leave the house as well. No matter how urgent her family's problems were, she still needed to buy groceries. Otherwise, Zhang Gaoer would come home to no lunch, and with old Zhang already furious in the morning, an unsatisfactory dinner would spark another rampage. I smiled and asked, "What's the last thing she'll do before going out?" Chen Jiangwo answered, "Tell that brat to hurry up and get rid of the cat." I asked, "Do you think the cat's dead yet?" Chen Jiangwo said, "With such a perfect opportunity, he wouldn't have finished that quickly." I heaved my aging frame off the sofa and waved at Chen Jiangwo. "Come on, let's go find the cat." 7:35 a.m. On our way upstairs, we ran into Xiao Sun as she was heading out. I began softly calling, "Kitty, kitty," while Chen Jiangwo spoke loudly to her. "A white one, a little gray, blue eyes, not very big. Where's the kitten? My wife loves it." His booming voice pierced through the Zhang family's security door. Xiao Sun wasn't much of an actress. Her tense hands and twitching mouth betrayed her. She touched her nose, then her hairline, forcing a smile as she said, "Haven't seen it." I knew Zhang Erqi could hear us. I can't describe this thrill to a normal person, but I knew that little brat must have been elated, even down to his curling toes. To torture someone's beloved pet just a wall away from its grieving owner, it was like the illicit thrill of an affair, knowing the lover's spouse was just outside the door. That perverse, forbidden excitement. No way he'd get rid of the cat so quickly. After exchanging a few more pleasantries with Xiao Sun, we climbed higher, putting on a good show. Chun Jangwo's knees and hips were both screaming by the time we got home. He collapsed onto the sofa, rubbing his legs, and asked, "When's the next move?" "At noon," I replied. He relaxed, but then his brow furrowed, and he scurried to the bathroom. I hurled a shoehorn after him, shouting, "Know your limits, you old coot. Sit down to pee. If you splash the floor again, I'll kill you." Chun Jangwo stubbornly refused to sit, preferring to bend over and wipe the floor every time. I could never understand what men's so-called pride was built on. It wasn't earning big money. It wasn't achieving great things. It was stubbornly standing to pee in a house with no one else around, only to end up splashing his own foot. Next time he's under general anesthesia, I'll suggest the doctor give him a vasectomy. Might save us all from the mess. 11:35 a.m. Zhang Gaoi came home for lunch. Chun Jangwo and I decided to repeat our little act, wandering around the neighborhood, searching for a cat. Naturally, we bumped into Zhang Gaoi and seized the chance to drop some intentional hints about the incident. She knew about her brother's past behavior. I caught a glimpse of her eyes darting to the side, her lips curling into a faint, sarcastic smile before she quickly reverted to a sweet expression, grabbing my hand affectionately. "Don't worry, Granny," she said, all innocence. "Maybe a neighbor took it in. I'll ask in the community group later." Her performance was leagues ahead of her mother's. No unnecessary gestures, no giveaway tics. As soon as she turned away, her steps quickened. She was rushing home, determined to catch her brother red-handed. Worried she might falter, I added some fuel to the fire. "If you like those apples, let me know. Granny's got more at home. I'll bring you another batch." Zhang Gaoi turned back and smiled. It was tight-lipped, her teeth grinding ever so slightly. "Thanks, Granny. I'd like that." I knew things were in motion. Sibling rivalry might run deep, but as long as parents aren't entirely clueless, it's rarely irreparable. Zhang Gaoi had her grievances, no doubt, but she wouldn't pass up a chance to even the score with her brother. As Chun Jangwo and I headed upstairs, the argument broke out. Zhang Gaoi's shrill voice cut through the air. "Pervert. Freak. Murder." Zhang Erqi didn't hit his sister. That was one thing he didn't inherit from his father. But the argument escalated quickly, and soon enough, there was a loud crash. Their door slammed open. Zhang Erqi was shoved out so hard, he almost tumbled into us. I feigned alarm and hurried to help him up. "What's going on here?" His face was streaked with fresh scratch marks, his whole body trembling with rage. Chun Jangwo, ever the neighborhood grandpa, stepped in with his pack of cigarettes. "Here, young man, have a smoke." Zhang Erqi grabbed the cigarette and lit it with shaking hands, inhaling deeply. His eyes were bloodshot, his breathing ragged. After a long exhale, he forced a twisted smile. "Sorry for the show." Chun Jangwo chuckled knowingly. "What's there to be sorry about? I've been married to her for 50 years, he said, gesturing at me. "You think we haven't had our fair share of fights? Family is like that. Sometimes you push, sometimes you pull. It's normal." Zhang Erqi smoked like his life depended on it. Chun Jangwo leaned in, adopting his fatherly tone. "Your sister's young, just a kid going through her rebellious phase. As her big brother, you've got to be the bigger person. Be patient, okay?" For a moment, Zhang Erqi's face went pale. I pretended not to notice and opened the hallway window. "Let's get some fresh air. Don't want the neighbors catching a whiff of that smoke, do we?" Back inside, Zhang Gaoi and her mother were locked in their own battle. "That's your brother," Xiao Sun shrieked. "Do you want to ruin him? Are you even human?" Zhang Gaoi's voice was ice cold. "Am I human? Maybe you should ask if he is." The desperation in Xiao Sun's voice grew. "Did you send it to your father? Did you send it to your father? You ungrateful brat." Meanwhile, Zhang Erqi stood in the hallway, his lips bloodless, his entire face drained of color. Xiao Sun burst out of the apartment, momentarily forgetting Qin Jiangwo and me. She shoved at her son, pleading, "You need to leave, just for now. Your dad will kill you if he sees this. Please." Enough! Zhang Erqi's roar silenced everyone. His bloodshot eyes darted between his mother and sister. His voice was eerily calm. "I didn't sleep at all last night." He glanced back toward the apartment, speaking each word as though it were carved in stone. "This is my house. I'm not going anywhere. If he wants to beat me to death, fine. Let him come." He turned back to Qin Jiangwo, extending his hand shakily. "Got another smoke?" Qin Jiangwo handed him one with a sympathetic nod, though his eyes glinted with hidden amusement. "Look, whatever's going on, he's still your dad. Talk it out before things get out of hand, yeah?" Zhang Erqi laughed, cold and sharp. He waved his mother and sister inside, then slammed the door behind them with a deafening thud. 12:10 p.m. Qin Jiangwo was washing the cigarette remnants in the sink, destroying the evidence. When marijuana gets wet, it disintegrates, revealing the odd substance inside. It was marijuana. It takes 5 to 15 minutes to take effect, inducing powerful hallucinations. For someone who has never used drugs, one puff guarantees a complete disorientation, a total loss of sense of direction, time, and reality. It's expensive, 20 yuan a pop. Zhang Erqi better finish that cigarette. We'd left a big loophole in our plan. But we're 70 and 73 years old. What do we have left to fear? Still, I told him, "You'd better clean up properly." "It's gone," Qin Jiangwo said. "This was just a memento for me, youth," he added, pouring a bit of disinfectant into the sink. He washed away the remains of the marijuana leaves, sending them down the drain. I used a broom to prop up a basin on the ceiling. It helped amplify the sound from the 5th floor. At 12:20, I heard the elevator move, stop at the 5th floor, and keys jingling as the door was forced open. We were about to see the fruits of our labor. Old Zhang's enraged shouting echoed through the building. At this point, the basin seemed almost comically unnecessary. The entire building probably heard his yelling. Sometimes I find it amusing. Old Zhang is obsessed with quality and constantly nags about it, complains his wife has no quality for using the washing machine at night, or for hanging laundry outside, or even for chatting with neighbors. He thinks buying too many groceries is a sign of bad quality. But when he's screaming his lungs out, it's suddenly quality again. Xiao Sun shrieked. Zhang Gaoi suddenly screamed too. The girl screamed in pure rage. "He killed the cat himself. You're hitting me? Did I force him to kill it? Did I make him hold the knife?" It was clear they were fighting mother and daughter. Xiao Sun cried. Zhang Gaoi cried too. The only one holding steady was Zhang Erqi, locking the door behind him. Then came the sound of kicking. I couldn't help but marvel. Old Zhang wasn't young anymore. The door didn't open on the first kick. The second was louder, followed by the sharp crack of the door splintering. I listened carefully. Silence. Old Zhang's growling could be heard. Then silence again. A crisp breaking sound. Silence. Shouting. More silence. Then the shrill screams of Xiao Sun and Zhang Gaoi, a chorus of female voices, each scream more piercing than the last, hoarse from sheer force. The door shook. There was no sound of it closing. Footsteps, frantic and hurried, thumped closer, at first steady, then staggered, as if someone was crawling and stumbling. There was a knock at our door. It was Zhang Gaoi. She screamed desperately, "Call the police! Call the police!" Her voice was full of despair as she pounded on our door. I peered through the peephole. Her face was covered in blood, and her clothes were soaked with it. Chun Jangwo shook his phone at me. I shook my head. Let's wait a bit longer. She suddenly spun around, her face contorted in terror, and scrambled down the stairs. I saw Zhang Erqi coming down after her, holding a knife. His steps were unsteady, his face wearing a dreamy, almost delirious smile. Blood dripped from the knife. Zhang Gaoi's screams echoed through the building. Then came Xiaosun, staggering out, her left arm soaked in blood, her shirt stained red halfway through. Then a hand reached out from the fifth-floor staircase. Thank God, when adrenaline kicks in, vision sharpens, or I would have missed the pale, twitching hand reaching forward, trembling with effort. It was old Zhang's hand. Even at the brink of death, he still struggled, crawling out of the apartment, half a flight of stairs down, desperately reaching with a hand that draped over the first step. I couldn't help but smile. He didn't move anymore. No one dared open their door in the building. Xiaosun's sobs echoed through the hall. The police would arrive soon. It was now 12:40, exactly 7 hours after I tossed the white cat downstairs. I clasped my hands together and murmured, "Little cat, I'm sorry, but you need to understand, your death was not in vain." 7 hours. Trash disposal report. Zhang Erqi was taken by the police. Xiaosun was rushed to the hospital. Zhang Gaoi was escorted by the Women's Federation, and old Zhang was carried out by the coroner. Zhang Gaoi had only minor scratches. She'd tripped on her way down. Xiaosun had blocked the knife, suffering a cut on her left arm. Old Zhang had been stabbed 4 times. He bled out and couldn't be saved. Zhang Erqi was arrested for murder, awaiting trial. The property value in the neighborhood plummeted, especially in our building. My daughter was left looking green in the face, watching her inheritance dwindle visibly before her eyes, pulling her hair in frustration. Meanwhile, Chen Zhangwo and I acted as if nothing had happened. My daughter couldn't hold it in anymore. We were hoping to sell the house for a better school district for Yanqing, but now? Who's going to buy here? Chen Zhangwo, unfazed, smiled at her and said, "Bring Yanqing over next weekend. We miss her terribly." My daughter, irritated, shot back. "You'd bring Yanqing to a house like this?" "Who said that?" Chen Zhangwo retorted, pouring himself some tea and sipping it leisurely. "Right here," he continued. "This is the safest place in the world." My daughter laughed scornfully. "You too? You'd be too scared to even catch a mouse. Give it up." Still, she agreed to send Yanqing over next weekend. Nothing makes parents happier than getting rid of their kids, and at our age, we still adore them. The major flaw in human evolution. Humans should have their first kid after retirement, when they're rich, willing, and have time. Only then can they truly become great parents. Yanqing entered holding a fuzzy toy. Was it a rabbit or a bear? "Granny, is there no big brother upstairs anymore?" I smiled. "No, there's no one. And there never would be again." Chen Zhangwo, shameless as always, acted like a spoiled child. "Oh, my leg hurts so much." Yanqing, ever so considerate, rushed to him. "Let me rub your leg." The old man's face lit up with satisfaction, grinning like a fool, his glasses and dentures glinting. His bald head reflected the light, and I couldn't help but sigh. I grabbed the eye drops and gave them a quick splash. Old age, it's hard to admit, but there's no escaping it. Yet, even an old wolf still has its claws. Sorry, but I've still got some protection for my family.